Hi, my name is Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about geographical profiling. This is the third video of a set of 3 that discusses geographical profiling. David Cantor suggested that people reveal themselves through the locations where they commit crimes. Geographical profiling is the process of determining the most probable area of an offender's base of activities through an analysis of his or her locations. Geographical profiling is the study of criminal spatial behaviour, the development of decision support tools that incorporate research findings, studies of the effectiveness of these applications, and exploration as to how such tools can help the police investigations. There are 2 fundamental approaches to geographical profiling. First, that individuals have a mental map of the area. Second is that route finding ability. I did talk about that in the last 2 videos that I released on the psychology of place. I'll put a link to those videos in the description box if you want to go watch them. So geographical profiles are used in an investigation of a series of crimes to locate the most likely home base of the offender. The base could be where the offender lives, but it also could be a place of employment, friends, or a family member's house. It's a significant previous or current home. It could be any place that's meaningful to the offender. David Cantor argued in 2003 that geographical profiling was born in 1980 when a UK police investigator analysed the location of crime scenes of the Yorkshire Ripper and computed the centre of gravity of the crime scenes thought to be linked to the case. It turns out that the offender actually lived in the town that the investigator predicted. In the mid-1990s, more sophisticated models for predicting an offender's home address were then developed. These were building on research conducted by Brantingham and Brantingham in 1981. Rosmo in 1999 summarised the research in this area, which has been that most crimes occur in relative proximity to the offender's home. Why travel 10 miles when you can just travel 1 mile to get it? This area of study begins to understand how we conceptualise space and places. It also draws on some key theories within psychology. These are routine activity theory, crime pattern theory, and rational choice theory. Routine activity theory proposes that for a crime to occur, there are 3 components which must converge in time and space, and these are the presence of a likely offender, a suitable target, and the absence of a capable guardian. The movement of people through their daily routine activities generates opportunities for these elements to converge and therefore influences the likelihood and risk of crime over time. The approach focuses on the discovery of opportunities in the form of victims and targets during the non-criminal activities. Brantingham and Brantingham developed crime pattern theory, which draws heavily from routine activity theory, to propose that individuals develop an awareness of space, an area of familiarity during their day-to-day activities, and that this governs the geographic pattern of their criminal and non-criminal behaviour. Awareness of spaces include nodes, and these are the places that people travel to and from, such as home, work or friends, paths, the routes between each of these nodes, and edges, which are the boundaries of the region of familiarity. Rational choice theory by Cornish and Clark proposes that the decision to offend is purposeful and rational and is made by weighing up the pros or gains, such as personal or financial gains, associated with crime against the cons or the cost, such as the risk that's involved in carrying out those activities. These decisions are governed by environmental cues and the rational consideration of the efforts, rewards and costs associated with the potential crime locations. Lundgren and Cantor developed this further by outlining that the rational choice explanation of spatial behaviour involves the making of decisions and choices which exhibit a trade-off between increased opportunity and greater reward the further the offender travels from home, as well as the cost of time, effort and risk involved. In other words, a criminal's routine and rational choices will depend on the rewards, including whether or not they are likely to get caught, as well as the risks associated with the actual crime. Lundgren and Cantor outline that the concept of limited rationality best explains spatial behaviour of offenders. Offenders don't consider all of the relevant factors every time an offence is committed. Other influences, such as mood, motives, perceptions of opportunity, alcohol, and their appetite for risk, apparently unconnected with the decision at hand, take over. Offenders are therefore behaving as rationally as they see at the time. But what's considered rational might change over time. Crime trips follow a distance decay function, with the number of crime occurrences decreasing with distance from the offender's home. In other words, the further away, the less crime. There are also differences in the distance travelled to offend for various types of crimes. Research has shown that the most important influence on where criminals offend is where they go during their non-criminal activities. These distances can be written into a mathematical model, which is then used to predict the likely home base of the offender. In doing this, investigation resources can be applied in a more targeted way. This mathematical equation has been used in several software programs to predict where the offender is likely to live or work. In some serial crimes, the number of known suspects can be in the hundreds or even thousands, and a geographical profile can help police to manage this information and reduce time. A geographical profiling is used to prioritise suspects based on their address information. Analysts can use a geographic profile to prioritise records that the police department already have access to, such as arrest records, field interviews and jail booking sheets. These files often include the offender's address, physical description and prior arrest charges. Other databases might also be used in conjunction with a profile, such as parole, probation, motor vehicle registration bases and so on. If you Google the term geographical profiling, you'll see lots of articles and websites talking about Kim Rossimo as being the founder of the technique. This isn't strictly true. He is undeniably an expert in the area. However, David Cantor and his team were writing articles on the subject before that time. In this second half of the video, I'm going to discuss some of the more technical aspects that need to be considered within geographical profiling. Cantor and his colleagues say that there are two important aspects that should be considered when examining the movement of criminals. And these are propinquity and morphology. Propinquity is the tendency for the probability of crime locations to reduce as the distance from the offender's home base increases. This is otherwise known as the distance decay function. The other factor is morphology, and that's the tendency for crimes to be distributed around the offender's home or their base. Morphology relates to the structure, whereas propinquity relates to the closeness. Propinquity deals with the proximity of the crime location to the main places in the offender's life, notably his or her home or base. The circle hypothesis builds on the idea of there being a simple starting point to see if the offender would have a base within that area. It's not always clear how large that circle is, and it doesn't always follow that the offender has a base at the very centre of that circle. However, the circle hypothesis is a predictor of the home location. The home base is typically where the individual sleeps, and this ultimately depends on the type of offender. We know that we regularly travel around areas that we know best. We're biased to certain types of information. More information will be available at locations close to where our home base is. Therefore, it's more probable that offenders will be aware of criminal opportunities in these areas. It was Brantingham and Brantingham who first pointed out that the security of the offender's home range and the familiarity of the area outweighs the risk of recognition in regions that are not in the immediate area of the offender's home base. Therefore, familiarity is a determining factor of where criminals will commit crimes. There are both maximum and minimum distances from an offender's home base to the area in which they'll offend. An offender will form a mental map of his home range, and this mental map probably influences criminal and non-criminal spatial activity. Criminals tend to not travel very far to commit their first offence. A buffer zone exists around the offender's home, where the offender is unlikely to engage in criminal acts because of the risk of identification. Fritzen argues that the spatial behaviour of burglars is more random because the opportunity to commit burglary exists everywhere. The location of their crime site, therefore, needs to be expected to be more dependent on concerns about detection or opportunistic factors, such as coming across a house which is unoccupied and doesn't present environmental or psychological obstacles against being burgled. Cantor and Larkin found that the home base was a location within the crime circle and is likely to be close to the centre of that circle. The average distance of offences to home for offenders studied by Cantor and Larkin was found to be, on average, about 1.53 miles. Criminals typically travel further away from home at different stages of their offending careers. Cantor and Larkin found that the diameter of the circle was the distance between the two furthermost crimes. The circle consists of the smallest area incorporating all of the crimes. The research has been extended so that a prediction of the offender's home location can be derived for any given series of crimes by defining the criminal range for that series using the smallest possible circle that encapsulates all of the crime locations and treating the centre of that circle as the most probable location for the offender's residence. Cantor suggests that there are two types of criminals: commuters and marauders. Commuters commit crime around an area that they have some familiarity with, but this is well away from their home location. Marauders commit crimes that are more spread out. The assumption underlying the marauder model are: 1. The opportunity for crimes is evenly distributed. 2. The offender has a base within the area of those crimes. 3. The tendency to put distance between adjacent offences. 4. The offender feels vulnerable in the area of previous offences. And 5. No very precise targeting is made. There does need to be some consideration of the typical spatial layout of an area though. I'll give you a personal example of why this matters. I went to visit my family in Australia last year. By the way, I miss you, Auntie Derry, Uncle Peter, Claire, Michael, Matthew, Natalie, Erin, Bridget, Tara and Elena. Of course, not forgetting Gaz, the inappropriate zebra. Anyway, we went on a trip to Margaret River and we were told it was just down the road. It wasn't. It was something like a 3 or 4 hour car journey. But that's because just down the road or local to me means anything up to about a half an hour's worth of travel. But Australia is such a massive country, spanning a whole continent. They think of distances in much more vast terms. The final aspect that needs to be considered within geographical profiling is the circle hypothesis. The consistency hypothesis theorises that criminals will carry out similar level of crimes. They're most likely to live near where they carry out their crimes and are more likely to know the area quite well, and therefore there are more crimes committed in that area. The spatial consistency hypothesis is that offenders will only commit an offence in an area that they know. In understanding all of these various aspects of movement, we can begin to understand and predict the most likely home base of offenders. It means that experts have been able to write algorithms for these computer models and computer programs to use, and all of these models predict where an offender is likely to live. Geographical profiling doesn't directly solve cases, but it can help to focus an investigation and help manage large volumes of information. It's been used with great success in many investigations around the world. I do hope that you found this video interesting and informative. Most importantly, I hope that you learned something new. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.